The U.S. territory of Puerto Rico has taken a direct hit from a major Atlantic hurricane, and that's our first report today on CNN 10. I'm Carl Azus. Despite its location in the Caribbean, between the Dominican Republic and the British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico doesn't often have hurricanes make landfall. Most of them pass to the north or south of the island. As you see here, that wasn't what happened Wednesday with Hurricane Maria. It became the first Category 4 storm in 85 years to directly pass over Puerto Rico. Maria's wind speeds at landfall, 155 miles per hour. A government spokesman says it caused total devastation. Puerto Rico is about 100 miles long and 35 miles wide. On Wednesday, 2/3 of it were blasted by hurricane-force winds. More than 3.3 million people live in Puerto Rico. Last night, none of them had electricity. Well before Maria hit, Puerto Rico had a number of problems. It filed for bankruptcy earlier this year. It's been in an economic recession for 10 years. Tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans have been moving to the mainland U.S. This disaster could only make its economic recovery harder. While a weakened Hurricane Maria headed toward the Dominican Republic, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and the southeastern Bahamas, the immediate concerns on Puerto Rico were figuring out how to get help to where it's needed and how bad the damage is.
But intensification is just like it sounds. A storm, a tropical storm, cyclone, typhoon, hurricane, that rapidly intensifies. Now the definition is 35 miles per hour or greater in 24 hours. Now take Maria. Maria went from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in 15 hours. For true RI, or rapid intensification, you need a couple things. 86-degree Fahrenheit water or greater, and no shear. Also, of course, the water down in the tropics is very warm. But what about this shear thing? We hear about it in tornadic thunderstorms. Those storms want a lot of shear. Wind going in different directions and different speeds with height. A hurricane wants no shear. No wind direction change, no wind speed change with height. It wants to be the only thing out there making its own wind, not getting blown apart. So why is rapid intensification important? Well, you can go to bed one night expecting a tropical storm and have a Category 2 on your doorstep the next morning.
A new national emergency is what Mexico's president is calling an earthquake that struck his country on Tuesday. It was the second tremor to shake Mexico in less than 2 weeks. This one was a magnitude 7.1 earthquake. Its epicenter, the point on the Earth's surface directly above the quake, was in central Mexico, about 100 miles southeast of Mexico City. And it occurred at a depth of 32 miles, which is considered a shallow earthquake. That's significant because shallow tremors are usually more destructive. Damage and deaths were reported across hundreds of miles. At least 225 people were killed in this disaster across Mexico, but the number could go higher. It's just too soon to know. The country declared 3 days of mourning for the lives lost. This quake struck in the afternoon when people were at work and school. In fact, Mexico's government says more than 2,000 schools were damaged by the quake, some of them seriously. Millions of people have no electricity, and many have moved into shelters with their homes either destroyed or uninhabitable. The Mexican government says its priorities are rescuing people who are trapped and getting medical help for those who are injured. Residents are helping officials in the search for survivors. That's going on around the clock. Water and canned food are being collected at soccer stadiums and other venues.
Number 1. An earthquake occurs when 2 blocks of the earth slip past each other. Now, for most of the time, those blocks are together with friction, but they are building up energy because they are moving in different directions. When one block decides to slip, all of a sudden that energy is released by seismic waves, kind of like ripples on a pond, creating the earthquake. Number 2. An earthquake can occur very near the surface of the earth. Those earthquakes are typically very destructive, or as deep as 400 miles down into the crust. Now, where the shaking actually happens, that's called the hypocenter, but directly above it on the surface, that's called the epicenter. Number 3. The power of an earthquake is called magnitude. Now, the intensity of the shaking can vary depending on the geography, the topography, or even the depth of the quake. Now, the USGS says there are 500,000 detectable quakes every year. 100,000 can be felt, and 100 will create damage. Number 4. Earthquakes themselves actually don't kill that many people. It's the natural and man-made structures that fall to the ground during the shaking that injure and kill. Number 5, the majority of all earthquakes and volcanoes happen along plate boundaries. The largest is the Pacific Plate and its series of boundaries all along the Pacific Ocean, known as the Ring of Fire.
10-second trivia. Which of these U.S. cities was once named New Orange? New York, Newport, New Orleans, or New Haven? New York City was temporarily named New Orange in 1673 in honor of a Dutch prince. So the Big Apple was once the Big Orange, and before that, it was New Amsterdam, also named by the Dutch. It's a place where, as long ago as 1643, a Catholic priest counted 18 languages being spoken on the streets. So, history, New York's got it. And in a report that's fitting for a Throwback Thursday, we're visiting the city's oldest bookstore. It's not exactly a 17th century relic itself. This place was founded relatively recently in 1925, but some of the volumes on its shelves go back much farther in time.
It's one of those places you can't believe still exists. Actual books on actual shelves, many bound in actual leather. This is the story of the Argosy Bookshop. There are also maps and prints and autographs. 6 floors bursting with the best of civilization. And it all started with an immigrant named Lou, who spent every spare nickel on his beloved books until he had enough to open a store. Barely.
It wasn't enough to fill the shelves in the store, so he put them face out instead of like this. And
so the shelves wouldn't look too empty.
Right.
He raised 3 brilliant girls amid these stacks, and Naomi, Judith, and Adina never left. Not when he passed in '91, and not now, even though the building he left them is worth a fortune. The place next door sold for $49 million.
They wanted
What
to
are you 3 doing here? You could be in a hammock
We
in the
could be in a
Caribbean.
I'd rather be here. That's the whole thing. We really
love what
every
we
day.
do.
It's very exciting when you're called to look at a library and we price each one and put each one in the place where it ought to be. And then people come in and they're so thrilled to buy it. And they're happy and it's a very wonderful cycle.
Do you see the internet as an asset or an enemy?
Both. It's an asset because we reach hundreds of thousands more people than we ever could. It's a detriment in that cheaper books are harder to sell. Books that used to sell for $20 or $25, you can find for $2 on the internet. But rare books become even more rare as you realize no one else has a copy. We have books on the shelf here that are 100 years old, 200 years old. Where's your Kindle going to be in 200 years?
April Rodriguez is a yoga instructor who also happens to own goats. So a friend of hers suggested goat yoga. Rodriguez says her first thought was, who would come to that? But when her first class in Berryville, Virginia sold out, she knew she was onto something. Participants say the animals are fun, they're calming, they're therapeutic. They like to position themselves under people doing yoga and reportedly try to eat hair or chew on toes. But if the thought of an animal taking up a ruminant on your mat doesn't get your goat, well, maybe this is something you gotta try to see why people would chew the cud over goat yoga. And if it doesn't make your heart skip a beat, well, you've certainly got plenty of scapegoats. I'm Carl Azus, and that's CNN 10.
Y lo que nos instó a abrir este restaurante es que deben tener la dignidad, no solamente debemos dar de comer. Es un Robin Hood, pero no es robar a los ricos para dar a los pobres, sino es compartir.
Si caes en una situación de ese tipo y te encuentras un local con una asistencia de este tipo tan idóneo y esto, pues es muy reconfortante.
Me parece parece que debería de haber más sitios como estos porque ayudar no cuesta tanto y hay gente que lo necesita. En una sociedad como la nuestra, donde aunque se hable de crisis, es una ciudad donde hay comida que se tira, creo que fundamental es un derecho el dar de comer a la gente.